Well, sometimes grabbing a fleeting opportunity is better than not grabbing an opportunity at all. I came real close to missing a grand opportunity, if you will, at the Grand Canyon to do some plein air, and we weren't there strictly for that. In fact, we weren't there for that at all. But we hoped to fit it in, and we did. Just a little bit. And sometimes that's enough. Oh, plein air at the Grand Canyon. What an opportunity. But I'm here to tell you a little bit of an opportunity taken advantage of is better than a missed opportunity altogether. And better than nothing really doesn't even adequately describe what I came away with. I'm so glad I took advantage of what time we had. And it just added to our whole experience. We had a blast. Well, all total, we were at the Grand Canyon for about 4 days. As I've mentioned in past videos, we were there for each other, to just have fun. But we were keeping a side eye out for any spot that we could potentially do some plein air. My wife is my videographer often. She even wanted to try a little plein air herself. We were a little bit taken back at how hard it was to find a spot that was both near the edge of the canyon where you had the views, was out of people's way, and had decent shade because it was hot. This is one of the coolest temperature-wise spots in Arizona, and yet it was hot there. Temperatures midday were around 95. Compared to my native South Carolina, where we're in the Appalachian foothills and we have shade everywhere, the open skies of Arizona, shade is a little bit few and far between. Yeah, that's it. So a nice, cool, shady spot out of people's way with a nice vantage point. A little tough to find, but we found one. It was late in the day next to last day that we were there, and it was great. Temperatures had dropped into the low 80s. We were getting a nice cool breeze, and you can see the beautiful shade. And I had a nice, beautiful view. Despite the crowds that would, pass in front of us quite frequently, it still wasn't bad. And unfortunately, I had about 45 minutes. Our plans had just kind of not worked out at the times that we had expected during that day, so it was actually a last-minute decision to go back to the canyon and grab some plein air. So glad that I did. So glad that I did. And that's sort of my lesson here. Well, it's not my main lesson, but it's an important factor, and that is take advantage of what time you have. If all you get is a pencil sketch, do that. I had a very loose kind of a sketchy painting, as you will see, as you can see, but it was enough. And getting your eyeballs on the actual scene is so important. The colors, the distance, the feel, and just being there is just part of the experience and the fun. And that excitement and those memories carried me through as I finished painting this in the studio. Well, this is what I ended up with, and it's something, to work from. I am currently here just trying to build in some darker values and doing a little bit of lifting. But I had a lot of things I wanted to fix. And honestly, and I'm going to talk a lot about this, one of the challenges I gave myself was to work on characteristics. In other words, look at these objects, these rock formations, these buttes or whatever you call them, and get the characteristics so that I can be inventive. This kind of subject is very difficult to copy value shape for value shape, proportion for proportion, and really there's no point in doing that. I wanted to get the overall shape of the main formations, but when it came to the values, the highlights, the little shadow shapes, little crevice shapes, all of that, I wanted to be able to be inventive, simplify in places, add them where I thought they would work, delete them where I thought they wouldn't. And that's just a matter of being very observant. And I really kind of had to work through this a lot. Work on it until I was happy with it, because I wasn't immediately. So because I had such a sketchy start, So I really just started in kind of reclaiming some of the light areas. Can always paint them back to a darker value if I need to. Kind of hated how that main butte there looked like a man-made pyramid, sort of a 4-layer cake. It was a little too well spaced and mechanical looking. The natural butte or formation was not like that, so it's a little frustrating sometimes how the human hand can just naturally sort of make things into a pattern or equal spacing. So that's something that I thought about and looked at and worked on throughout this whole thing. I also wanted to construct in or build in a few more of the values around it. I was keeping a vignette, but I wanted to add just a little bit more, a few more objects for context. Extend the values where I saw them being dark, and adding details where I felt I needed them. So we're still here in the basic construction phase. I'm using mostly gouache, but at different points I ended up using transparent watercolor. Transparent watercolor, I feel like the darks actually do a better job for darks than does gouache. I like the results. Transparent watercolor darks, I think, are just better. They're more luminous. They dovetail just fine with gouache, so a lot of times you'll see me using dark colors from my watercolor palette. If you have a really messy, sort of too sketchy of a watercolor that you want to kind of change or improve, it would make a good gouache project. Gouache is a natural smoother, and so when you use it a little more opaquely, it smooths out those really kind of messy looking washes. Now right here, I'm trying to push back that distant canyon. Canyon sort of angles away from us, and I wanted to get some of that distance in there, so I'm using gouache. So I'm trying to add some of that. I'm also, in the doing of it, trying to gain some atmosphere. But, back to the idea of a characteristic, painting characteristics rather than copying. I do it with trees all the time, and I'm less familiar with rock formations, especially these southwestern U.S. rock formations. And it was just really neat to be studying these shadows, the shapes that the tears make in these buttes, the way the highlights fall and the color of the shadows. Just a lot of fun. This compositionally was not great. You can see that lower butte that I was starting to construct. It's just kind of lined up too tangentially with the top one. We'll try to fix that later. But again, this is a study of how these formations look. Still don't like that main butte because it still looks like a pyramid, man-made pyramid. And I don't have recorded all of the steps I took to fix it, just because it gets kind of tedious. But you'll see as this goes along that I'm just adjusting things here and there. I'm adjusting an angle here, the shape of a highlight there, the shape of a shadow over here, trying to randomize things a little more. By randomize, I mean, not make them look so mechanically spaced. It's just really a challenge in playing with shapes so they look natural. I hope you can see now I've added some angles to that upper pyramid-shaped butte. And it's starting to look a little more natural. I'm starting to get a little happier with it. Sometimes these things, you think I have a plan, you think I know exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. When I paint these things, I don't. Sometimes I just work at it until I get it right. It's a little easier to do with gouache, obviously, because gouache is opaque. And that's one of the reasons I went over this with gouache. But I tried things. I just kept changing highlights, kept changing the shape of shadows. Now the photo in the shadows were very, very dark, very difficult to see into them. So one of the goals I had was to open up those shadows with a little more detail. I still wanted it to look like shadow, but I wanted you to be able to see highlights and shapes within those shadows a little better. Now this is something that I love to do, and this is a great technique you should try. This is glazing transparent watercolor over gouache, over highlighted areas of gouache. It's a very effective technique. It's called a backing technique. I put in a lot of those highlights almost white, cream colored white, but they're chalky looking because they are so white. And you can mix up gouache in a color, but it's a lot more effective if you just go very bright and then glaze over them with an extremely thin glaze of watercolor. And you can see how the color is starting to pop. That's harder to do with gouache as a color versus a glaze. And if you're careful, use a soft brush, very pigmented paint that's diluted, you can get some really nice color glows. And I'm using more blues. You can see me adding some glazes here. Again, same concept, except it's not over light values, it's over deep values. But I'm using transparent watercolor because it is so transparent. And it doesn't change the value a lot, but it adds some deeper color. So on the shadow side, I was able to get some nice cool shadows. And I really felt like that made it pop. I was very happy when I did that. It was a nice reflection and finish to what I'd experienced that day. I'm so glad I came home with that sketch. Thanks everyone. Appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, patrons, for support of this channel. You are the sponsors that make this content possible. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.